So now that we have an idea of what educational psychology is, we'll be looking at the historical development of the discipline and look at the various iterations of the field, how it has evolved, how it has morphed into what it is today. So before we move on, let's recap. Let's look at what we've covered so far in Unit 1 with regards to educational psychology. What we've discussed so far is that it's the study of learners, the study of how they learn and how they get taught and how teachers teach them. It also takes into account learning preferences and learning differences and why we need to understand the importance of these differences and preferences. Then, of course, it looks at the process of learning from birth to the end of life, everything in between, the expectations of when children or adults or teenagers would experience certain things. And so this is related to milestones. So what are the milestones that we need to be aware of, especially when children are developing in infancy and when they're toddlers and adolescents, of course. So things like when do they talk, when do they walk, when do they crawl. There's not necessarily pinpointed dates, but we do understand that it happens within a specific period. And if it doesn't happen within that period, then it could be a red flag for something that we need to pay attention to. The field is about accumulated knowledge and wisdom. How we understand things has been documented and recorded across the decades, across the centuries, so that we're at a point in our existence where we have more information than we've ever had before. And this knowledge is important within the field. And then also it looks at how we can best meet the needs and areas of strengths of our learners so that we can mobilize these strengths to help the child develop confidence and then help them to acquire new skills. So as you progress through the units, as you read the articles that are uploaded, as you read the chapters that you are expected to read, you'll start to think about what the field is really trying to do. What are the main aims? And so through my own readings, through my own experience, I've started to put together for myself what the field is to me, what I feel the main aims are. So I've put some of them here, and you, of course, can decide on what you'd like to add to your list. So right on top for me, which is very important, is the fact that the field is transformative, it aims to be transformative. Transformative in various senses of the word, not only transforming the educational landscape, but also transforming people, transforming teachers, transforming school systems, assessment systems, transforming the way that we approach students and individuals. And this transformation is not only within the education system, but within our country. We are a country that is wanting to transform, is in the process of transformation, which is a very painful process, but a very important one as well. Another aim is the value of inclusion within our communities, in our societies, and in our schools, not only including people with learning differences, but also different races, different ethnicities, genders, abilities, level of understanding, the way of looking at the world, the approach to learning, the way in which they learn. So inclusion includes all of that and so much more. And with being a South African and being in our context, we want our education to be, we want our learning, and we want our conversations to be contextually and socially relevant. They need to make sense within our context. We cannot kind of grab a European or a American or Asian or any other society. We cannot grab their way of doing things as has been done in the past. We've taken, or we've been sometimes forced to work within systems that haven't been made for our context specifically, and therefore they fail because they don't really speak to what is important to us as a country. So this is a very important aspect of educational psychology as a discipline. Then, of course, collaboration. We don't work in competition, but rather we work together hand in hand to be able to provide the platforms that are needed for our learners and our teachers and everybody else. As we spoke about in the previous slide, it's about accumulated knowledge and wisdom that has been really brought together over decades and centuries. And although the term educational psychology may not have always been in existence, it has always been something that people have been looking at. How do we learn things? How do we develop skills? How do we acquire skills? And then these two, the next two go together, honoring individuality and respecting difference and uniqueness. These two are quite linked because we need to move from wanting everybody to fit in the box and everyone being the same to honoring that there are differences, to respecting the fact that someone works better with their hands rather than having a mathematical ability, because this is also important and needed in our society, and people shouldn't be made to feel different or less than because they don't meet certain criteria. And then we need to also be part of promoting a democratic society by being agents of social change within our systems and within our communities. And then for teachers, this is not an exhaustive list, it's just the tip of the iceberg. But for teachers, it's about helping them to develop their educated gut. And if you've been in my modules before, you know what an educated gut is: trusting that feeling that you have about something, but also the fact that that feeling is based on knowledge that you've accumulated, wisdom um, that you've also accumulated because of experience. So that educated gut helps you to make quick decisions because it's things that you've experienced before. Then, of course, guidance on establishing relevant assessment norms that are applicable to our context, our students, and our level of education. And then helping to create a socio-emotional climate that is conducive to the process of learning, and valuing the fact that children are not just academic beings, but they have emotions, they have feelings, they have social needs, and these need to be taken into account when planning and addressing learning challenges or learning abilities. So these are generally what I feel are important aims and themes that run throughout this discipline, but you should create it for yourself to help you to understand how this all fits together. So we're now going to step into looking at the progression of this discipline across. It's going to be quite a while back that we're going to be reaching, but a lot of this should sound familiar to you, especially the names will be coming up, what would be names that you've heard before. So let's begin with that. So you will see that the 100-year journey journal article has been uploaded to Moodle. And it's important that you start with this document, reading this journal article, which is quite huge. And I suggest that when you read it, you use the highlighting tool to highlight the important aspects of this document. Although it's quite extensive, it gives you a good idea of where the origins of this field are, how long ago and how far ago it's actually started in a very different format, and there's various iterations across the years or across the decades. But it also, for me, when I read the article, I connected to certain parts. I connected to certain parts of the history, which are extremely interesting because you think that it's something, oh, where did this term come from? It's something that has developed in recent years. But actually, it's been something that has existed for decades and centuries, but just in different settings, and it's been approached differently. So in understanding the history, not only it's going to help you with your assessment, but also it's going to give you unique insights into what has been implemented and talked about and suggested ages ago. We may not have applied it in the education system, but today we are seeing how those discoveries decades and centuries ago are actually very applicable to our current context. So you'll see many theorists like Vives and Rice and Quintilian, if I'm saying the name correctly. You'll look at the discoveries and the contributions to the field of education by these theorists and by these let's call them academics over the years, and you'll see that it's very interesting how their work still filters down into our system today. I like the fact that they also talk about religions, ancient civilizations, and societies, and how they have also really contributed to the way in which we approach learning and education, and the way in which we understand the importance of the individual within that education journey. So this document is definitely something that you should read and be very cognizant of the various changes and the various overlaps that these theorists have. So our first stop on our historical journey back in time is ancient India, and I want to just stop here and say ancient India is not the first and only ancient civilization that has really had an impact, was really spoke about the field, not maybe with the term specifically educational psychology, but specifically about about education. It's not the only ancient civilization, but it is the one that is spoken about, and a lot more information is available. So it's just important for us to note that It's definitely not the starting point of everything. But history does tell us that ancient Indian teachers applied some psychological principles when they educated the young children, and this was from about preschool age to adolescence. And they kept in mind that the various developmental stages, or we sometimes call it milestones, and they also kept in their mind the characteristic features were within those various age groups or various milestones. Importantly, they attach importance to the various emotions in learning, which were stimulated by external stimuli through the sense perceptions. So, what do we mean when we're talking about this? So, they essentially recognize the role of sense perceptions in learning and teaching, and they believe that the optical sense, which is the sight, auditory sense, which is your hearing, then the tactile sense, your touching, the gustatory senses, which is your taste, and the olfactory senses, okay, place of knowledge. So if you know a little bit about this, that for example, they say that the olfactory gland, which is your sense of smell, is most connected to memory. So if you have suddenly there's a smell that takes you back to a certain memory or time or place in your life, smell is definitely the biggest or the sense that is most connected to memory. So you imagine using smell in your classroom, connecting it to learning and actually helping your kids to understand and remember something well. And besides sense perception, imaginations, according to now the educational psychologists in India, they also played a vital role in the acquisition of knowledge. So I want you to think about this. When we have classroom spaces that are very dull, they don't really get students in an excited, creative space. It doesn't activate the imagination. This could really affect the way that a child is able to learn in the classroom because there's no activation of imagination, which paves the way for memory. Are we always told to decorate our classrooms, use color? Because this is something that attracts learners, it's something that excites them, and it's something that is important for their development and learning. Other factors that we recognize in educational psychology within the Indian context include intelligence, the hereditary, whatever's inherited from family, and then also the environment, which I just mentioned now. Principles of educational psychology were applied in the teaching of arithmetic or mathematics, language, and other subjects. And the principles of imitation, repetition, mediation, and reflection were important within the context at that time. Okay, so let's move from India. We'll move on to the Western world. Plato was the first champion of educational psychology in the Western world. He essentially believed that man was born with a certain type of virtue and that education helped in the expression as well as in application of life. Plato talked about the nature of learning and the teaching of virtues. He also discussed the interaction of heredity and environment. So that's a lot around the nature versus nurture debate. And he established a learning or connection between learning and sensation. So when we learn and we feel things, we do things, we understand it a lot better. And so this is a call to, if you think about experiential learning, actually doing something helps you to remember a lot better than if you just learning something by rote learning, memorization, or reading it from the board, or hearing it from your teacher, but actually to do it, getting your hands involved, touching things, trying things, really has an effect on the way, on what you're able to then internalize and remember. So Aristotle was a student of Plato, and he analyzed the process of learning and the nature of the learning. According to him, the psyche or the soul was the main factor. The soul has five faculties or potentialities, as they call it, including the rational faculty or the ability to reason. And these faculties were the basis of the learning process, according to him. And he observed that association or connecting things with each other facilitated understanding. If you hear about these coaches that help you to improve your memory, a lot of it is around association. So associating something with something else helps you to recall it and remember it a lot better. And they do this a lot with students as well. What does it remind you of, and what does it trigger in your memory?